Good morning, everybody. It is time for your Friday Parent-Child Relations class. I hope that you are staying warm this morning, and I hope that you stay safe this weekend. We are in for a doozy of a snowstorm, it sounds like. So anyway, stay warm, stay safe. We're going to jump right into what we have been talking about. Remember, we've been asking this question, does parenting really matter? Is it really important? Outcome? And the answer, of course, is yes. We talked about that the other day and kind of ended class with the idea of, yeah, parents' actions influence children, right? So we're going to continue into that vein of thought today. So you will definitely want to download your Chapter 4 concept map or your notes page and follow along, be ready to add on some notes to that. So we said, is parenting important to children's outcome? The answer is yes. Yes, it is. We have strong evidence of research that backs that up, right? Lots of research from looking at the child rearing practices to our own assumptions about parenting to even theories on parenting that we've talked about already, those family types of theories. So we have a lot of research that backs these kind of thoughts up. What we haven't really talked about is the experiments of nature, right? That there is an idea from nature that we can look at children, especially children who maybe have not had a parent relationship that has been good or even existent, and we can see just how deprived those children become. In fact, there's a term called hospitalism, talking about children who are raised in orphanages that were found to be affect or emotion starved, and then uh, leading into this syndrome called hospitalism. The children were deprived of love, but also had very few social interactions with any adults or really any kind of cognitive stimulation. And so they had some problems. They had some problems. There was impaired social competence. They weren't socially able to connect. They had behavior problems. They didn't know how to act in any given situation. They had delays in both their physical and their cognitive development, and they had what we called failure to thrive. What that means is that they were showing stunted growth patterns, right? And have difficulties forming relationships. So we know that there is historical research-based evidence just from looking at these experiments of nature that parenting really matters. Now, in your book, you saw a little Dropbox about Jeannie Wiley. Hopefully you read that. I want you to watch this video, and I want you to engage it. It's going to talk about Jeannie and who she is, and kind of show you from uh, her experience that that parenting really does matter, and when that relationship is not there or not healthy or not what it should be, that children um, are at high risk. So check this video out.
Girl, and they say, was kept in such isolation by her parents that she never even learned to talk. The girl still wore diapers and was uttering infantile noises. A social worker discovered the case 2 weeks ago. But the authorities are hoping she still may have a normal learning capacity.
Among the first to see the child was Temple City Detective Sergeant Frank Lindley.
I already knew that the child was 13 and a half years old. I took one look at her, and she wasn't much bigger than my daughter Beverly, who had just turned 7 about 3 months earlier. And I really had a hard time conceiving of the idea that the child was the age that she was. The child obviously had been severely mistreated. She was still in diapers, couldn't walk. She had no verbal skills at all at that point. The last time I was on this street was probably 30 years ago. Yep, there it is. Hasn't changed much. The backyard looks the same. It's all weeds and dead grass. Looks the same as it did in 1970.
The house belonged to Clark Wiley. A loner, Clark had turned his back on the world after his mother had been killed in a hit-and-run accident. After the accident, things in the Wiley house would never be the same again.
The house was completely dark. All the blinds were drawn. There were no toys, no clothes, nothing that would ever indicate to you that a child of any age lived there. The child's bedroom was back in this corner. That was the bedroom. The windows were covered to about 3 inches from the top, which was the only natural light that had ever come in there, and all the time the child was in the bedroom. The entire furnishings of the bedroom consisted of a cage with a pull-down chicken wire lid and some type of piece of wire securing it when they closed it down. There was a potty chair with some kind of homemade strapping device.
For 13 years, Jeannie had spent her nights locked in bed, her days strapped to a potty chair. During that time, Clark had ordered his son John and wife Irene never to talk to her. In her darkened room, she had led a life of near total isolation. Even close neighbors were completely unaware of her presence.
We came home from work and the police was there and they came to question us. That's when we found out, what happened and, that they had a little girl. Nobody knew before. And when we found out what happened and how she was treated, everybody was shocked and just unbelievable.
For their whole marriage, Clark had imposed his will on Irene. And blind with cataracts, she had been too scared to resist. But one day, something broke. While Clark was out buying groceries, she seized her chance and fled. It was the first glimpse the world would have of Clark and Irene's dark secret.
I met Clark and Irene at the Temple City Sheriff's Station. They were both under arrest at the time. When we interviewed Irene, she would make no mention of the family whatsoever, particularly the children. I attempted, along with my partner, to interview Clark. He refused to talk to us. He wouldn't say a word. He never even acknowledged that he understood what we were talking about.
Mr. Wiley?
Yes.
Why did you keep your daughter in a room?
Mr. Wiley has no comment.
No
We haven't had time to discuss the charge. We haven't even seen them.
Unable to face the truth, Clark took matters into his own hands.
This morning, the authorities reported that 70-year-old Clark Wiley shot and killed himself just before he was to go to court and be arraigned for child abuse.
After 13 years, Jeannie was at last free. And for scientists, she was just the case they had been waiting for. For 13 years, Jeannie had lived a life of complete isolation. Raised in a city bedroom, Jeannie was as much a feral child as if she had been brought up by wolves. At 13, she was the size of a 6-year-old. Worst of all, she had never been taught to speak. The question now, could she ever learn? Jeannie's case was so scientifically important that the government funded a team of scientists to help answer the many questions she posed. Two of the scientists who would become especially important to Jeannie were child psychologist James Kent and linguist Susan Curtis. Neither had ever encountered a case as extreme as Jeannie's.
We looked
looked at her as a newborn in a way. Although we know she came with 13 years of memories and experiences, not all of them wonderful, most of them not, I think. And so we thought we needed to start to expose her to what the world was going to be like for her outside the hospital bed.
To Jeannie, everything was a new experience.
We did what you would do with your own kids if you were introducing them to the world. You take them out and hold them up and show them, sort of judge from how they reacted to whether this was too much or not enough, and you could move on and do the next thing.
Jeannie was making amazing progress. As the experts looked on, they realized that she might be the answer to the question that had troubled science for so long.
So we seized this wonderful opportunity that she provided us in as loving a way as we could, but using it to finally get our chance to address head-on specific hypotheses and notions about human language and the human mind.
These hypotheses were based on the latest ideas about how children's brains developed. According to the theory, young children could only learn certain things at certain times, called critical periods. Language was one of these critical periods, and according to the theory, Jeannie, who was now a teenager, had missed her chance forever. But incredibly, Jeannie seemed to be proving the theory wrong. As this footage shows, Jeannie was blossoming. Not only was she delighted by the world around her, but she was learning the words for the new things she was seeing.
She was extremely interested in everything around her. She wanted to know the word for everything around her. She wanted to engage people all around her. She was not mentally deficient. Her lights were on, and everyone who worked with her, from teachers to therapists to me, knew that she was not retarded. It was clear as day. And as she began to learn more and more words, hundreds of words, much more rapidly than I ever imagined, and stringing them together, I began to think maybe I will be wrong. Maybe she will be the one to prove that this hypothesis is incorrect.
But Jeannie could not escape the effects of her past so easily. She was still haunted by a traumatic upbringing, trapped by the memories of the awful fate she had suffered. And linguistically, she had stopped making progress.
She learned tons of words. She has an enormous vocabulary. But language is not words. Language is grammar. Language is sentences. How do you make a sentence? What can be a sentence? What is a sentence? How do you automatically know something's a sentence? So it wasn't because she was cognitively deficient. In other respects, it was because she was cognitively deficient in this island of human mind, the mental faculty that we call grammar.
At the time Jeannie was found, brain science was in its infancy. But today, we have a much clearer picture of what actually happens in cases of extreme neglect like Jeannie's.
In Jeannie's brain, the left part of her brain, her cortex, that has those neural systems responsible for speech and language, because she never heard any words and because she was never spoken to very often, they didn't get stimulated. And because they weren't stimulated, they got smaller and less functional and disconnected, and ultimately that part of the brain literally physically changes.
Today, with modern imaging technology, we can actually see what happens in the brains of feral children, and the effects are shocking. Without normal stimulation, their brains are smaller and malformed, and the earlier this neglect begins, and the longer it carries on, the worse the damage will be. Starved of stimulation, Jeannie's brain had simply not developed the capacity for language. And now that she was a teenager, she would never be able to learn. Despite this, Jeannie continued to be a close part of everyone's life. But there was more trouble ahead.
Children have to belong to somebody when they grow up, and she was still a child, and she needed a family to belong to. So that's what we would have liked, a family that she could belong to. And that's not what happened, unfortunately. What did happen is about the worst outcome I think we would have envisioned.
On her 18th birthday, Jeannie moved back with her mother Irene into the house in which she had been so terribly abused. But after only a few weeks, it was clear that Irene couldn't cope. From here, Jeannie was moved into state care with terrible consequences.
I was a student, and people wouldn't listen to me. People who needed to intervene did not listen to me. And so I spent lots and lots of time on the phone pleading with people to intervene and save this person who had had the worst experience of deprivation and isolation in all recorded medical history.
Jeannie moved from home to home, sometimes with the very people who served as her therapists. This potential conflict of interests raised tensions among the many people involved in her life, and a tug of war erupted over the child. As Jeannie's condition deteriorated, Irene decided that Susan Curtis and the other academics had become too close to Jeannie. A lawsuit followed.
I went from being asked to be her guardian to 1 week later being prevented from seeing her or phoning her. And ever since then, I've been prevented from having any contact at all. So although I have lots of, I'm still a scientist, I'm still interested in knowing things about her language now and all kinds of interesting things I would like to pursue academically. Primarily, I would just like to see her.
Now a ward of the court, Jeannie lives in an adult care home somewhere in Los Angeles, prevented from seeing the people who once meant so much to her.
Okay, welcome back. I'm gonna re-plug in here. Okay, so I hope that you got something out of that. Really what I hope is that you could see that parenting really is important, right? And in the case of Jeannie, when that parenting wasn't there, she was very much delayed, and those delays were social, they were intellectual, academic, and even when she started to get some language skills, eventually they realized that she might never fully be able to express herself with language. So I want you to really see this idea that we're talking about, that parenting really does matter. It really does matter. We've talked about it not just from research, not just from those side of things, but we mentioned the theories that we've already talked about. And I just want to highlight it again, thinking about attachment theory, and we think about the attachments that we talked about that children might make and remember. There are 4 types of attachment: 1, secure attachment; 3, insecure attachments; and avoidant, resistant, and disorganized. And we're not going to go over those again. You've had notes on those, but I want you to make note of some other research that shows us just how important those attachments are long term, right? We know that infants who are securely attached develop a positive working model of themselves and others, and that those ideas carry into new relationships with teachers and peers and things as they grow, and that we have tons of support for this theory, tons of research supporting this theory that children who have secure attachments to their mother, especially, or to a caregiver early on, are going to be more compliant, enthusiastic, all of those things, and they're going to have better emotion regulation, physical health, all of those types of things. And they're going to be better at doing those things as adolescents and adults and moving forward and so forth. What you may not know is the even longer term effects of childhood attachment being in play when it comes to our adult attachment styles. Right? So there's actually 4 adult attachment styles too. There's a secure attachment style. This is where adults have a positive view of themselves and of others. There is the preoccupied attachment style, where adults have a negative view of themselves, but a positive view of other people. There's a dismissing attachment style, where adults have a view of others that is negative, but a view of self that is positive. And there's the fearful attachment style, where people have both a negative view of themselves and of others. And what we know is that um, these styles relate to their own competence and childhood recollections. They're related to attachment bonds that they had when they were children. People who hold secure reputations of attachment, people who have that secure attachment style as adults, were likely to have a secure attachment with their parents and are very comfortable, or at least comfortable, maybe not very comfortable, but comfortable with intimacy and autonomy, independence. We know that preoccupied, dismissing, and fearful individuals all experience relationship problems and more than likely had attachment issues with at another point in time, right? And so there's just this idea that parenting isn't just important in the short term, but even looking at some of these theories like attachment, we can see that child attachment is correlated with adult attachment. And the way that we attach to our caregivers as children is going to impact how we do relationship moving forward. That's important to know. Uh, we also know this from research that looks at parenting styles and behaviors. All of those things that we put up on the board and on the screen the other day and talked about, those are important here. Thinking about the idea that parent style matters, authoritative, authoritarian, permissive, neglectful, all of those things matter, and they're all determined by the degree to which parents engage in specific behaviors, right? And all of those things are associated then with child outcome. And we know that. We can look at those things. We can ask those questions about behavior and about style that parents engage in, and we can find correlations between those styles and child outcome. Some positive, some negative, but the relationship is there. So we go back to our question, is parenting important to children's outcome? The answer, of course, is yes. Yes, it is. But there's even more research that goes beyond that, thinking about behavioral genetics, right? Because everything that we've talked about before this has all looked at the impact of relationships. It's all had that social piece, but it has failed to take into account the role that our genetics play in this parenting relationship, right? And what we're seeing, what we're finding is that there is this beautiful interaction between our genetic makeup, our genes, and the environment that we are a part of that is constantly at play. It's called gene environment interaction. And so, how our parents engage in parenting can be impactful based on our own genetics, right? For example, individuals who have a genetic propensity for something like violence are much more likely to engage in violence if they live in poverty and are in a violent neighborhood, or who are maybe witnesses of violence. So environment and genetics interplay with each other, and they matter. Another way that we might look at this is through what we call the trajectory model. The trajectory model. The trajectory model of parenting suggests that parents play an important role in guiding their children's development. And they do that in 3 basic ways. First, by establishing trajectories, which is determining the direction that children's development will take, or parents will mediate trajectories. They're going to really powerfully influence how children perceive, react to, and understand the environment and their experiences. And finally, parents may modify the speed at which the children are traveling along their given trajectory. So they may modify how fast they are going, right, to promote development. So let's break these down very quickly, just so you can kind of get an idea of what we're talking about with each of those 3 things, and add these to your note sheets there. So when we talk about establishing trajectories, 4 different ways that might happen. First, through promotive strategies. Promotive strategies. These are strategies that are designed to encourage, to foster the child's talents, to foster opportunities. It's going to involve encouraging the child, engaging in collaboration with the child, creating pathways for the child, like music lessons or after-school programs or things like that, getting them involved in something promotive, right? A second way of establishing a trajectory is guidance by direct instruction. Sometimes parents guide their children toward a particular pathway simply by instructing them towards that particular pathway, right? A third way of establishing trajectories is through preventive strategies. We call this cocooning, right? Just as parents instruct their children about positive pathways, we also proactively initiate the pathways in an attempt to avoid negative outcome, right? So what we mean by that is sometimes we engage in strategies that shield our children from negative influences or negative experience, right? Cocooning, protecting them. And then the fourth way of establishing trajectories is what we call parental support, sustaining interest, attending to children, encouraging children, providing them the support that helps them to sustain interest, to invest in something over a period of time, right? So with my daughter, very much in love with musical theater, we engage in several different strategies when it comes to establishing those trajectories, right? We promote, we provide her with opportunity to be involved with different musical companies, to have voice lessons and dance lessons and those types of things. We allow her to do that. We shield her from some things where sometimes in theater consumes everything, and we want her to still be a kid and enjoy that. So we shield her from doing too much at once, right? But we support her and we let her make some decisions because we want her, it's her interest. We want her to be invested in it. So establishing trajectories. The second part of the trajectory model, like we said, is that parents mediate trajectories. 3 ways that we might mediate a trajectory, that we might, along the path, we might exert powerful influence on the trajectory. The first is called pre-arming. Pre-arming. When we arm, we're talking about helping children prepare for some kind of changing situation, right? So we're going to mediate trajectories by pre-arming. We're going to do things like inoculate them with information that they need to know in case they're ever in a certain situation. For example, many African American parents engage in what we call racial socialization to prepare their children for hostility and prejudice or discrimination, those types of acts and events. So they're going to teach them specific strategies. They're going to teach them how to act in certain in certain times and what they're supposed to do to succeed if a situation arises, right? Um, Part of pre-arming might also be drawing attention to potential dangers, right? Just what's around in the environment that might be dangerous, and also providing like simple rules or mantras to live by, like make good decisions or don't talk to strangers, or one of my favorite, remember who you are and whose you are. I say that to Lydia a lot. So pre-arming, getting them prepared for a situation. The second way that we mediate is through concurrent mediation. And so this is coming alongside the child as they are experiencing a situation and helping them interpret that, helping them to give words and feelings to what it is that they are experiencing, coaching them on how to react to what's going on in the present, being emotionally available to them, and really coaching through reaction that they might have, especially from media influence, right? So Lydia is very smart, and she's very much an advocate for people with disabilities because of her little brother, and she's very interested in news and social justice types of things. And so when she hears something on news or via some form of media or social media, she asks a lot of questions. And we want her to do that because we want to help mediate her trajectory. We want to come alongside her in the moment and coach her and help her. And the third way that we mediate trajectory is through debriefing. And so pre-arming is before a situation, and concurrent is in the middle of the situation. Then debriefing naturally is after a situation has occurred. How do we influence our children? Well, we're going to influence them with getting them to talk about how they perceive something and influence that perception. If something was painful for them, we might come along and talk about what they can learn from that pain, right, and move forward. It might be counteracting a damaging experience. It's going to help them process their emotions, right? Reroute from a negative trajectory onto a positive trajectory. But debriefing, right, coming after a certain situation. And then the final way that we influence trajectories is by modifying the speed. Parents might modify the speed. They may do that in one of two ways. The first is acceleration, which is speeding up the child's development, right? Parents, especially in America, are really eager to speed up development at times. Definitely not difficult to find examples of this, right? Expectant mothers who train their fetuses, infants who are enrolled in cognitive enrichment daycares, parents reading to their infants to enhance literacy skills later, right? The very young age that children participate in organized sports, right? And the overreaction of parents in those sports, right? You'd be amazed at some of the whack job parents I've seen coaching six-under baseball. Oh my goodness, it's crazy. So speeding up, accelerating, right? Sometimes this comes with overstructuring, and we end up hurrying the child, and we try to fast track them, and that comes with its own types of issues and problems there. The second way that we would modify the speed is deceleration, slowing down the child's development, right? Maybe this is holding a child back a year in school. Sometimes this comes along with overprotection, right? Helicopter parenting, trying to slow them way down, delaying their normal socialization experiences, delaying their ability to succeed in academics, right? My birthday fell at a time where I could have been accelerated or decelerated, right? Born at the end of July, and I ended up being accelerated and starting kindergarten because academically I was where I was supposed to be. Now, what that meant was I was always the youngest one in my class, and had my parents known that I would have been that I was going to be a late developer as well, they probably would have decelerated. They probably would have held me back and not started me into kindergarten until a year after they did. That way I would have been closer to around my peers, right? Socially, physically developing, and all of those types of things. So acceleration, deceleration, modifying the speed of a trajectory. Now, all of this stuff that we've talked about, whether we're looking at answering the question from an attachment point of view, or a styles point of view, or a genetics point of view, or a trajectory point of view, all of these ways of answering the question, is parenting important to children's outcome? The answer is yes, and the outcome that parenting influences can be divided into two very broad categories: promoting physical development, healthy physical development, and promoting healthy social, emotional, cognitive development. Right? Promoting healthy physical development, promoting healthy social, emotional, cognitive development. Parenting matters. It matters. There's no getting around it. So I hope that you have if learned nothing else from this chapter. I hope that you have learned that the one answer to the question, is parenting important to child outcome, is always going to be yes. Yes, it is. All right. Stay warm, stay safe, and stay healthy this weekend. I love you, and I will see you on Monday. Bye-bye.